Good afternoon, everyone. Today, we have Bob Kudla from Trade Genius. You always hear me talk about his services, specifically trading on agriculture, when I, in my videos, reference crop losses, damage to cold, damage to floods, and always direct you over there to take a look at how they're trading. Bob's very familiar with the grand solar minimum, the effects of the cooling, the cloud cover, the floods, the droughts that accompany these events on a 400-year pattern, and how they're going to be trading with this strategy of the grand solar minimum. So, Bob, I'll let you take it from here. Introduce yourself, please, so everybody that's listening and watching can get a better understanding, because I know your track record is absolutely amazing. Well above 80% for every year that you've been trading so far. And the gains that they're giving in savings accounts, or even if you have somebody trying to help you, a minimal 5, 6, 8% is ridiculous compared to the returns that you're getting. So I'll let you take it over from here.
Oh yeah, well hey, good morning. Finally we get a chance to do this interview. I know it's a long time coming, and I equally share your passion. And just for people who don't know who I am, I've been trading as a trader, first as a passion since 1991, and then really professionally. And when I say professionally, really for my own family since 2006. And I've had a signal service since 2011. And then we started Trade Genius from the prompting from a lot of people that wanted me to have a broader reach just this past year. And it's just been an amazing journey. And my background is that from Pennsylvania, I was an officer in the Marine Corps. And then I spent 20 years in the financial services software industry, working for two major Fortune 500 companies, and I finished my career as an executive. And my background there was I started in sales, but I ended up doing a lot of strategic planning and mergers and acquisitions. And then finally, our company was bought out, and I decided to go out on my own. And I kind of take a parallel track in my life. I was in the mid-40s, and I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do next. I wasn't too excited about going back into the corporate world. And at the same time, and I'm sure you share the same thing a lot of your listeners do, is that I really struggle with the direction the world was going, and I try to figure out what is it that I can do personally, and then also profitably to take care of my family, take care of my country, take care of my friends. And so myself and a partner, we started a solar energy company, and we still have that company running today. And so that my view is that don't complain, do something. And that's how I got started doing the stock signal service. A lot of people were very, very lost in terms of how to trade. They were mystified. Things that should happen in the market based on what they see in the world just wasn't happening. Exactly, sorry. And so they're like, why are you winning when it should not be happening that way? And just like in climate, and maybe that's why I'm drawn to climate, trading is the same way. It's really pattern recognition and cycles.
If I could talk about the cycles for a moment, when you just said about helping people on this planet, whether they're really close to you or whether you're giving information that can help them be not so fearful and come at decisions they make from a more of an understanding base. When we talk about these cycles, they're in 400 years, and they're so discernible in the record climatically, even going back 15,000 years. You can start to see it again and again and again. And when it recurs, all you have to do is look back in history, like I know you're doing recently. And
Absolutely, Dave. And so one of the things that when you talk about cycles is that the stock market, believe it or not, lines up with the climate cycles very, very well. And I'll talk about some of those things. And when you look at cycles with the stock market and cycles with climate, when the climate is warm, people feel expansive. And when the cycles for climate go cool, people feel contractionary. And it's kind of ironic, warm, expand, cold, contract, but it works on a personality basis too. You see that with the stock market. And so one of the things that I've noticed, and when I started to really start to get a feel for, hey, you know what? These solar minimums are becoming, the maximums were becoming less intense, and the minimums were becoming more elongated. And then I got a whole lot of information on, the solar minimums and then what's involved in that. And then I stumbled onto your site in terms of the grand solar minimum. And I decided to look back at, hey, how does this affect food prices? And I was really interested in this because there's very few things that are going to be able to stop the Federal Reserves around the world doing what they're doing. And so one of the things is that when food prices rise, the central banks can't print. I'll give you an example. In 2011, the last La Nina that happened, you had what they called the Arab Spring. Do you remember that?
I sure do.
So what happened there was that they were trying to devalue their currencies as food prices were spiking. And that's a recipe for disaster because the people that are most affected by devaluating currencies are the poor.
The everyday person that's on the street. So when you see these bouts of civil unrest in areas based on food prices, if you just look back in history, you can start to see the same repeating pattern in the 1800s, the 1600s in the modern minimum, in the 1300s as well with the last scroll with one of the solar minimums at that time. You start to see it again and again and again, the Wolf, the Spore, the Maunder, the Dalton, and then this new minimum that we're in. It's only going to repeat itself, but there's a larger population on the planet, and people are a little more trigger happy these days, if you will. So when it goes down, you'll start to see repeats of what happened in the Middle East, but in developed nations. In my opinion, that's my opinion, though.
No, and I think that's going to be the big shock for people. So, David, just to talk a little bit about how climate and the economy, work hand to hand, is that when you look at the cycles of the stock market, they also align very, very closely to these minimums or these La Nina events. And the reason being, as I just referred to earlier, is that politicians, and I'm not really disparaging on them, because they really reflect the will of the people. Nobody likes to take pain. And so their first rule is always to devalue their currencies. And there's only really two things that will stop a central bank from devaluating. It's high energy costs and high food costs. And I think high energy costs are really gone for a long time. There's just too many energy sources that are now emerging. So that emboldened the central banks, in my view, to really put on the gas after the 2008 market collapse. They were then buoyed by the fact that we've had a benign ENSO O&I environment where the crops were either benign or above production. And then it really manifested itself in this last El Nino. But they had a burp in 2011, and that's the one I want people to really look at. We had a La Nina event in 2011. It actually started in June or July of 2010. And you can look at the O&I data, is that when it went negative, that month, food prices started to go up. And it's no accident. I'm not the only person that sees the data and the correlations. And for the next almost 2 years, 18 months, the price of grains doubled. The price of coffee doubled. And those are the two areas that I follow the most. And so you have the grain package, and then you have what they call the softs. That's coffee, cocoa, and sugar. And so they spiked. And at the same time, we had a rice shortage, if you recall. It was a big mess. And because in northern Africa, they can't grow enough grain to feed their people. And we had a spot grain shortage. When that shot the prices up, coupled with the reduction in the currencies and the printing by the Federal Reserves, you had the Arab Spring, and that caused what they called the taper tantrum. I don't know if you remember that, because I know you're over in Taiwan. They had a taper tantrum where the Federal Reserve started to freak out, and they said, "Hey, we're going to stop all this asset purchases," because they had to get the dollar from the free fall, because it was killing all these third world countries that are tied to the dollar. And that was just a burp. What I believe now we're having the confluence is, and Dave, you speak to this more eloquent than I do. You have the 3.5, 7-year cycle, which I follow most closely because it helps him with trading. That's the ENSO. What really caught my eye is that, there's the 60-year cycle, and then the 180, 200-year cycle. And then I started doing some work because there is some U.S. data around the 1820s, and I was most particularly interested in what happened between the 1820s, 1860s in the emerging grain belts as the settlers were moving west.